There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't arrive as a sudden crisis or a visible wound. It creeps in quietly, usually while you're scrolling through your phone late at night, or sitting across from a friend who just got promoted, or watching someone your age step into the life you thought would be yours by now. It's the slow, sinking feeling that everyone else is moving forward while you're standing still. And the worst part? You can't stop measuring. This is the psychology of comparison, and if you've ever felt its weight, you're not broken. You're human. Social comparison is not a flaw in your character. It is, in fact, one of the most deeply wired instincts in the human mind. In 1954, psychologist Leon Festinger proposed the social comparison theory, which essentially explains that we have a fundamental drive to evaluate ourselves, our opinions, our abilities, our progress, by looking at other people. In our evolutionary past, this instinct served us well. Knowing where you stood within your tribe meant survival. It meant understanding whether you were contributing enough, whether you were safe, whether you belonged. But here's the tragedy of that ancient instinct in a modern world: we were never meant to compare ourselves to thousands of people simultaneously. We were never designed to witness the highlight reels of millions of lives, curated and filtered and presented at their most luminous. And yet, that is exactly what we do every single day. What makes comparison so psychologically corrosive isn't the act itself. It's the direction it takes. Psychologists distinguish between two types: upward comparison, where we measure ourselves against those who seem to have more, and downward comparison, where we look at those who seem to have less. Upward comparison, when healthy, can inspire. It can show us what's possible. But when it becomes habitual, when it's fueled not by aspiration but by shame, it transforms into something far more damaging. It stops asking, "What could I become?" and starts whispering, "What is wrong with me?" And that whisper is where so much suffering lives. Think about what that voice actually sounds like in your daily life. It might show up when you attend a friend's wedding and realize you're still figuring out your relationship. It might appear when a colleague receives recognition you've quietly been hoping for. It might surface when you visit your hometown and sense that others seem more settled, more certain, more arrived. In those moments, the mind doesn't just observe a difference. It constructs a story in which their success is evidence of your inadequacy. A story in which being behind on someone else's timeline means you are failing at your own life. This is the moment where comparison stops being a neutral observation and becomes a psychological trap. Because you are not comparing your full, complicated, behind-the-scenes reality to their full, complicated reality. You are comparing your internal experience, your doubts, your setbacks, your fears, to their external presentation. And that is a comparison that will always, without exception, make you feel like you are losing. What's important to understand is why this pattern often runs so deep. For many people, the habit of comparison didn't begin in adulthood. It was seeded much earlier, in classrooms where grades were posted publicly, in families where siblings were measured against each other, in childhoods where love sometimes felt conditional on performance. When a child grows up in an environment where their worth is tied to how they measure up, they learn to scan the room constantly. They learn to locate themselves on an invisible ladder. And that learned behavior doesn't simply disappear when they grow up. It follows them into their careers, their relationships, their sense of identity. There is also a deeply emotional layer beneath comparison that rarely gets named: grief. When you look at someone living what you thought your life would look like by now, what you're often feeling isn't just envy. It's mourning. You are grieving a version of your life that hasn't arrived yet, or perhaps a version you've had to let go of entirely. That grief is real and it deserves to be treated with tenderness, not dismissed as mere jealousy. The problem is that most of us have been taught to feel ashamed of comparison. We're told to be grateful, to stay in our lane, to focus on our own journey. And while those are beautiful ideals, they don't address the underlying wound. They simply ask you to stop feeling what you're feeling. And suppressed comparison doesn't dissolve, it goes underground. It shows up as chronic dissatisfaction, as resentment toward people you love, as a pervasive sense that no matter what you achieve, it will never quite be enough. This is what psychologists sometimes call arrival fallacy, the belief that once you reach a certain milestone, the comparison will stop, the satisfaction will come, the feeling of being enough will finally settle in. But it rarely does. Because comparison is not actually about the other person's life. It's about your relationship with your own. So what shifts when we begin to understand this? What becomes possible when we stop treating comparison as a moral failing and start seeing it as a signal? The signal, most often, is pointing towards something you care about deeply. You don't compare yourself to others in areas of life that don't matter to you. When the comparison is painful, it's usually because it's touching a genuine longing. A desire for connection, for recognition, for progress, for belonging. And that longing is not something to be ashamed of. It is something to be listened to. The path forward isn't to eliminate comparison entirely, that would be both impossible and unnecessary. The practice, rather, is to become a more conscious observer of your own mind. To notice when comparison is activating and to ask, with genuine curiosity, what is this telling me about what I value? Is this upward comparison inspiring me or diminishing me? Am I measuring my process against someone else's destination? And perhaps most importantly, to practice what psychologists call self-compassion. Not the surface-level kind that tells you to be positive, but the genuine, warm acknowledgement that struggle is part of every human life. That the person you're comparing yourself to is also navigating invisible battles. That being at a different point in your journey does not mean you are at a lesser point. That timelines were never meant to be identical, because lives were never meant to be identical. There is a concept worth holding close here: identity-based comparison versus trajectory-based self-reflection. Instead of asking, why do they have what I don't have, the more healing question becomes, am I moving in the direction that actually matters to me? Because growth is not a race. It is a direction. And direction is something only you can define for yourself. The people who seem the most at peace in their lives are rarely those who have the most. They are those who have learned to measure themselves against their own values rather than someone else's milestones. They have made peace with the uneven, non-linear, deeply personal nature of a human life. And that peace was not found by accident. It was built slowly, intentionally, with a great deal of self-forgiveness. You are not behind. You are on your own path, moving at a pace that is shaped by your history, your healing, your particular constellation of circumstances. The life unfolding around you is not a race you're losing. It is, if you allow it to be, a story you are still writing. And it is not too late to change the story you tell yourself about where you stand.